So hello, everyone. On behalf of Code for Canada and Evergreen, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, How to Be Smarter, Technology and Data in Mid-Sized Cities in Ontario. My name is Luke Simcoe, and I'm the Communications Lead at Code for Canada. Along with Julie Fader from Evergreen, I'm going to be your MC for today's discussion. I think it's fair to say that Canada is having a kind of smart cities moment. Infrastructure Canada's Smart Cities Challenge is pushing municipal leaders to reimagine how they can use technology, design, and data to improve life in their cities. The number of grassroots civic tech groups in the country's doubled in the past year, and civic hackathons were held in almost every major city in Canada this month to mark International Open Data Day. So this movement towards smart cities is going to continue to accelerate in the years to come, and it presents a critical opportunity for leaders and communities of all sizes. With that in mind, Evergreen and Code for Canada partnered to explore how various new technologies, new processes, and a growing wealth of data are impacting municipalities across Ontario. We explored the challenges smart cities leaders can face when adopting new practices, and also the strategies they're using to meet and overcome those challenges. So today, we're going to share with you some of the findings of that paper and highlight the experience of 5 of the experts whose voices helped shape the report. We're going to begin by introducing Code for Canada and Evergreen, and we're going to outline sort of the lenses that we approach the smart cities conversation through. We'll then discuss the report's methodology, and then we're going to dive into our 9 recommendations for smart cities leaders. Once that's done, we're going to get to the best part. We're going to hear from our speakers. So we've got a great lineup of smart cities experts operating both inside and outside of government. You're going to hear from Stewart McDonough at the City of Guelph, Kelly Bergeron from Cornwall, Andre Cote, a consultant and former public servant at the province, Sean Galloway, a former planner with the City of London, and Titus Ferguson, a civic tech leader who also hails from London. Afterwards, we'll discuss sort of how you can engage more with Code for Canada, Evergreen, and the broader smart cities conversation, and then we'll have a Q&A. So speaking of questions, we've asked attendees to ask any questions they may have via a shared digital whiteboard that we've set up. You can type your questions in there, and at the end of the webinar, we're going to take a look at them, and Julie and I will sort of act as MCs and throw questions to the panel. So you can follow the link that's on your screen and just type your questions in right into the document in real time, and we'll answer as many of them as we can, time permitting. Great, so what's Code for Canada? Where do I work? We're a national nonprofit that launched earlier last year in April with the goal of connecting government innovators with the country's technology and design community so they can work together to improve life for Canadians. We often say that the 2 biggest levers for improving people's lives at scale are technology and government, and at Code for Canada, we bring them together. And we do that in a few different ways. We have a fellowship program that recruits talented technology and design professionals and embeds them inside of government departments where they can use their skills to build digital capacity in the public service and design and deliver kind of the improved digital public services that residents expect. We also have a community network that works closely to support the creation and growth of the grassroots civic tech movement in cities across Canada. And we have a suite of education and training tools and curriculum that help both public servants and community members put civic tech to work. And that word civic tech is sort of the lens that we approach the smart cities conversation through. So loosely defined as the intersection between technology and public life, civic tech often takes the form, at least here in Canada, of grassroots meetups where people with an interest in technology and design can channel their skills and their passion into public good projects. So they're developing tools to help residents understand municipal budgets, they're building civic engagement apps around things like cycling, and they're building the real-time transit apps that residents want but haven't been developed or delivered by the cities they live in yet. So we work with these groups to help them form or grow and to amplify their successes. Across Ontario, there's already a number of civic tech groups, including established ones like Civic Tech Toronto and Ottawa Civic Tech, as well as new ones to the scene like Civic Tech Waterloo Region and Civic Tech London. The work these groups do is kind of already making their cities smarter, and we see them as a vital resource for anyone working in the field of smart cities. Before we go any further, we thought we'd define what we mean when we say smart city or smart cities. The term kind of gets tossed around a lot, and I think it's important to have a shared definition. So we think of smart city as one that's resilient, inclusive, and collaboratively built, and one that uses technology and data to better the quality of life for everyone, for all people in that city. And that last word is key. The smart cities conversations often focused on new technologies as kind of an end unto themselves. We prefer to focus that conversation instead towards the impact those technologies can have on people, as well as the people working behind the scenes and the processes that can empower those people to use new technologies and channel them towards resiliency, sustainability, and inclusivity. So that's it for me. But for now, I'm really happy to pass the mic on to Julie Fader from Evergreen. So Julie.
Thanks, Luke. So my name is Julie Fader. I'm a program coordinator at Evergreen. Evergreen is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to making cities flourish. So you may know us because of that picture on the screen right now. We have a site in Toronto called Evergreen Brickworks. But beyond activating that amazing site, we have national programs that engage Canadians in creating and sustaining healthy and dynamic urban environments in our schools, our public spaces, housing and transit systems, and communities at large. So we have programs in urban agriculture, school ground design, transportation, housing, conservation, community building. So this work is actually part of the Midsized Cities program, an interdisciplinary program that aims to help Ontario's mid-sized cities thrive. So for us, a mid-sized city is an urban area with a population of 50,000 to 500,000. So this program, when we started it, kind of came out of the realization that these cities have traditionally been overlooked in mainstream urban research and policy discourses, despite being home to over a third of the Canadian population. So when we started this, conversations with leaders in mid-sized cities pointed to the need for more connection between researchers focused on mid-sized cities and what we call practitioners, so those doing the work on the ground in the public, private, or nonprofit sectors. So the program involves, among other things, a research collaborative. This is a cohort of about 30 researchers working on mid-sized cities. We put out an annual research series that showcases some of their work. We also do an annual researcher and practitioner roundtable, which kind of brings together these two groups. This year it's being held in London on May 16th. And we also do deep dive research. So this work falls under that kind of umbrella of work. So recognizing that data and tech is becoming kind of a key component of city building, and Canada cities are thinking about the federal government's Smart Cities Challenge and what that might mean in their local context, we really wanted to provide a resource for mid-sized cities that speaks to their realities. So as we illustrate in our report, the global push for smart cities presents Canadian leaders, like yourselves, with numerous opportunities as well as risks. And we think it's important to have these conversations to critically evaluate how tech is being applied and learn from each other to make our cities thrive. So what's really exciting is just how much smart work is happening in our mid-sized cities. This report speaks to some examples, but there are many, many, many others being driven across sectors, whether civil society, government, private, academia. So for this report, we let the doers speak for themselves with a series of interviews with 15 key people working in the space who understand the mid-sized context. So again, you'll hear from some of them soon. These people represent a range of expertise in the areas of data and tech within the mid-sized context. So those interviewed hold a variety of roles, people trying to push change from within municipal and provincial governments, as well as those working on projects from outside of government. We also heard from researchers who are studying the positive and negative impacts of data and tech in cities. So through these conversations, what was really interesting and exciting is we found that mid-sized cities are actually really, really well positioned to become leaders in this space. So almost everyone we interviewed described mid-sized cities as tight, nimble, less bureaucratic. So they have smaller governments that result in public servants and officials having a greater sense of the city and kind of the needs of their residents. So they can get faster buy-in from community members and often have fewer bureaucratic hurdles to overcome than they might in a larger city. We also found that mid-sized communities can afford to experiment in ways that larger cities might not be able to, since they're under kind of closer scrutiny from higher levels of government, larger numbers of residents, and a national or international audience. We also found that because mid-sized cities are smaller, tech enhancements can go further and be felt more concretely by more residents. Even one new innovation can have a significant ripple effect on the city's ecosystem in a way it might not in a bigger city. So this unique mid-sized city context leaves them really, really well positioned to lead in the space. So now I'll turn it back to Luke to kind of go over our main findings for this report.
Thanks, Julie. So yeah, so after speaking with all these experts and hearing about case studies in communities across Ontario, we kind of took all their knowledge and insights and we distilled them into 9 recommendations for smart cities leaders. Now, these recommendations are kind of focused on the mid-sized cities context, but they're certainly applicable to communities of any size or region. So like no matter how large or small your community is, or whether or not it's located in Ontario, these recommendations can definitely help accelerate and advance your smart cities projects. So the first one was that we found that successful smart cities identified needs first and technology second. So they started with a problem, not a new technology. Rather than say, we're going to do something with blockchain, they decided to be, we want to develop a better transit experience for users. We want residents to be able to more easily access data about a budget or a certain issue, or we want people to better, engage with the city around issues like development or other forms of consultation. So you start with a problem, and then, after you speak with users, then you can begin to, discover what kind of technology might actually address that problem, rather than doing that in reverse. We also found cities designed for inclusion. As sort of the smart cities movement accelerates and as more and more new technologies enter the scene and get picked up by local governments, there's a possibility that the adoption of those new technologies can kind of exacerbate existing inequalities or divides. So it's very important that when you're developing smart cities projects, that you consider who might get left behind and sort of what the opportunity costs are of adopting or not adopting a given technology for your residents. We also found that successful smart cities let the community in. As I mentioned earlier, there are people, sort of grassroots volunteers or other experts who are already working on projects that are making their cities smarter. And smart cities, rather than reinvent the wheel, they engaged with these members of their communities and found ways to kind of scale or amplify the work they're already doing. We also found smart cities look outside for new solutions. So rather than just staying inside of City Hall, they looked outside to the community, to public service champions, to the private sector, and they found examples and inspiration there, and were able to sort of bring those in and adapt and adopt those principles for themselves. They also look beyond city boundaries. There's a lot of opportunities and costs and challenges associated with smart cities projects and adopting any kind of new technology or any new way of working. But you can learn from other jurisdictions. You can share your knowledge with them and vice versa. And together, you can achieve a lot more. And so we found that smart cities are ones that collaborated with other cities and other regions and other levels of government. We also think it's really important to enable and empower public servants. No technology is going to be successful unless all the people sort of working behind the scenes have bought into it and feel, empowered by it. It's also about empowering public servants to work in new ways, right? New technology requires new ways of working, and projects won't succeed unless public servants feel empowered to, work iteratively, work agilely, work in the open, to experiment, perhaps even to fail, and also to forge new partnerships with sort of non-traditional partners. Investing in the fundamentals is something that we found is key to any smart cities project. Similar to identifying needs first and technology second, we found that there used to be this conversation around technology, around kind of shiny new objects, big revolutionary changes associated with technology. But as sort of digital tech and design and the ways of working associated with them have kind of matured, it's apparent that they're really good at meeting basic needs. And that's also a smart way to approach projects, because it allows for sort of smaller projects. You can learn, you can sort of test what it's like to scale, and then you can get some quick wins under your belt before taking on more ambitious technology projects. The sort of 8th recommendation we have is integrate to implement. And that means that smart cities things can't be siloed. Any kind of new technology, any data, any new way of working needs to be incorporated kind of root to shoot through your planning process. And that's going to make sure that those projects sort of get buy-in, break down silos, and ultimately move forward. And lastly, smart cities brand to build buy-in. So this is sort of the communications end of Smart Cities project. And as your city or your community is looking to advance the way it uses technology, it's important that that kind of those attempts are incorporated into the way that your city talks about itself. And that's going to help you attract talent. That's going to help communicate the aims and goals of any smart cities project, and it's going to engage residents. And that's so those are our 9 recommendations. There's a lot more about them, including case studies and everything in the report itself. And we also have experts who are going to sort of give some real-world examples of how those recommendations take shape. First up is Stewart McDonough. He's an advisor of strategy and innovation in the city of Guelph. And yeah, let's kick it to Stewart.
Well, thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me to be part of the conversation and represent the city of Guelph and be part of this panel. As you can see by what I'm about to talk about, I'm taking an innovation focus, data and technology, obviously a big part of that. So we'll go to the first slide. And I'm gonna reference the key insights as I go along here, but I'll be bouncing around. And I'm gonna start with brand to build buy-in, actually. And what we're talking about in Guelph, and a little bit about us: 3rd fastest population growth in the country, the 9th fastest growing economy for this year, 3rd best city for millennials, lots of software development, highly rated knowledge-based economy, and a space on the corridor. So the Toronto to Waterloo Innovation Corridor is an important part of our direction moving forward, but how are we innovative as an organization? And we started with smarter leadership and being intentional and deliberate and inclusive in putting innovation front and center. What you can see on this slide is how we've intentionally put it into our leadership charter. Has 4 key commitments, one of them about working with a community mindset, which is key to this work, as well as right up front, fostering innovation, allowing people to grow and to fail in this work is really important. So that's number 6, enabling and empowering public servants right from leadership throughout the entire organization. As an extension of that, we had to give ideas, channels, and chances to find their way. So smarter innovation all over, if we flip over. What we've done in Guelph is we've implemented an improvement network, which has a wide variety of opportunities for largely internally as well for staff to find ways in. So we established roundtables that we'll talk about. We built an innovation fund, which started out actually as the Dragon's Den until we got a cease and desist letter. But that's a place where great ideas from frontline staff can come to the fore, get support, whether it's resources or staff support in terms of how to get those ideas forward. Regular business process improvement, ongoing stuff that we like to bring in, new muscles to the organization. We have brought in customer journey mapping increasingly as a tool. We are working with the province's behavioral insights unit to start to bring behavioral insights into the organization, and the Guelph Lab that I'll talk a little bit more about in the future, the next slides, and with our Civic accelerator. The roundtables in particular was really a great way for us to start to look at how do we improve throughout the organization, bring technology in, hear from everybody from the front lines all the way through. A great opportunity to really empower that staff and give them the real juicy problems of the organization and say, yes, you have the responsibility to go and work with us to fix them. Another thing that we've done is implement how we're going to measure and impact collectively the work of the city, as well as from an innovation standpoint. So we built guelph.ca/the count, which is actually an open source platform, and it's still in beta and we continue to fix it. But I brought this into the mix because there's often a call to open source the work that we're doing in municipalities, and we know that that's a challenge. In our IT departments, they're fixing computers and working with legacy systems. They're not building code, and that's a challenge. So from that and a coordinated effort to bring innovation through a bunch of different programs, we realized that there was a bigger opportunity and issue. So we moved to the next slide. Innovation needs a way in. And we realized that procurement may be the biggest opportunity and challenge for municipalities that want to innovate. Understanding that we don't have all the answers, and that it's hard when we're just buying and making big jumps to buy something that's off the shelf. How can we create bespoke solutions that are tailored to our own circumstance, whether it's as a mid-sized city or geographically where we are, or our specific problems, understanding that that we don't know all of the pieces of the puzzle. And I go to number 2 of the insights and design for inclusion. We recognize that the RFP process is a barrier for many companies, and it favors those who've already worked with government. So how can we get into and open up our processes to early stage companies, to startups, to those innovative entrepreneurs that are out there? And we wanted to address that. Fortunately, as we move over, we worked into smarter collaboration and started to build a relationship with the University of Guelph. And that relationship created a unique partnership called the Guelph Lab. And the first thing that they tackled, that group, was procurement. And they came up with a number of different ideas that led us to the Civic Accelerator. So that accelerator, first, number 1 of the key insights is it identifies needs. We work with departments to figure out what specifically are their problems, what is ideally already on their work plan, so that we're not adding additional work. Oftentimes, innovation teams create their own problems by just always adding more work, where we're trying to find something that a department's already interested in fixing and make that work better, add resources to their plate instead of just added angst and anxiety. So number 3, as a key insight, is let the community in. We couldn't do this work on our own. So we worked with ODX out of Communitech. We worked with our chamber, with Innovation Guelph, with the University of Guelph, all to build this process and support it all the way through. Number 4, as an insight, look outside for new solutions. So as I said, we don't know all the problems. How can we bring in those entrepreneurs and innovators into our organization? So what we did, and we move into number 8, integrate, we actually embed the people that we're bringing forward into our, through the RFP process. They embed with the departments to build out the solutions instead of just buying them straight outright. The first cohort went very well. We had lots of attention, which has led us to the next iteration of this work and the next slide. So we have number 5 as a key insight is think beyond city boundaries. So we've taken the success of the Civic Accelerator, a lot of attention and support that we've had across the province and with a multitude of partners, to reinvent the accelerator as the Municipal Innovation Exchange, which is a new virtual center of excellence that we're just in the process of unfolding. We not all aspects have been formally announced, but in essence, we're taking that accelerator approach and that focus on challenge-based procurement, which wasn't even a term when we got started in all this work, and we're opening it up. We're looking at multiple cities, multiple challenges, with the resources of a multitude of partners, and to be able to invite entrepreneurs and other cities to watch and follow along the process as these companies embed into various cities to build out solutions that may be of use and of benefit across the public sector. So we're really excited about that work as it's moving forward. As I mentioned, it hasn't been fully and completely announced, but we've out in the field with a search for a program manager for that work right now. And we're really excited about the next steps and the opportunity to work with some really spectacular partners. So that's what we're doing in a nutshell. We're really eager to talk to anybody in this space who wants to collaborate, who wants to work with us. And again, I just say thanks very much to Cote for Canada, to Evergreen, to the other panelists that we've learned a lot from already. And we look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Great, thank you, Stewart. Next up is Kelly Bergeron. She's the Executive Director of the Cornwall Innovation Center and the founder of Code Heroes. So take it away, Kelly.
Good afternoon. If some of you don't know where Cornwall, Ontario is, we are right in between Ottawa and Montreal, right across the border from New York State. Cornwall just squeaks in as a mid-sized city, so I'm really grateful to be on this panel. I actually moved back to Canada 2 years ago. I had a role at Salesforce in San Francisco, and I came back to Canada to teach kids how to code. So when I visited back in 2015, around the time of the federal election, I brought Melissa Sarafine from Ladies Learning Code, which was then Ladies Learning Code, to Cornwall to teach a couple of workshops. And I found out that they actually weren't teaching technology here, or they were doing it in small little spurts. So at the time, with the new government, the Trudeau government coming in with innovation and diversity and everything that was happening in the US, I decided to pack up my things and move back to Canada, and took my own savings and brought it back here and started Code Heroes. So in the first 6 months, we were granted a Trillium Foundation Award. And for the next year, I was able to teach approximately 3,000 student experiences. Now, the problem with a place like Cornwall is that it's a small city, so you're not going to get the kind of numbers that you would get in Toronto. So what was happening was people in the rural areas were calling us saying, can you come to our schools? Can you come to our libraries? And I actually calculated that I took my car across Canada and then back again for the amount of kilometers I drove just to teach youth how to code. So that being said, if you want to move ahead on the slide. So I came back to Cornwall because I grew up here. I left about 20 years ago and went to college in Kingston and lived in Toronto and Ottawa. I worked for the RCMP and Department of National Defense. And I wanted to come back here because a lot of my family was here and I felt like I could make a big difference. It's really, really important to realize that we need talent in smaller cities because you can act nimble, it's more agile, and people embrace the change. And I've been very, very lucky in this community to be able to develop this program and build a reputation here as someone who wants to use technology to make change. I ran 4 hackathons and they were all civic based. So the United Nations Development Goals, city challenges, and then there was another one, the Trillium Foundation action areas. So there's been some really interesting developments over the past 2 years since I've been back. And one of those is being offered the position of executive director at the Cornwall Innovation Center. And we have a major contributor here who believes in our city through Carleton University. We incubate companies through their Lead to Win program. And right now we have about 12 companies in the incubator, and we're really, really trying to expand on opportunities in the area. I know Stewart was talking about finding the problem, Luke was talking about finding a problem first and then building out a solution. And we are trying to focus in on those key areas in order to build out some really interesting solutions. One of those is an urban revitalization project that I'm currently incubating, and I'm really interested in pitching it to some cities around Canada for this Smart Cities Challenge, and also marketing and branding our city as an affordable place to move to or to start a company from. So we have a really cheap cost of living, and we have a beautiful waterfront that is cyclist friendly and accessible from Ottawa and Montreal and Kingston and the States. Next slide. All right, so the last thing I'll just mention is that we do a lot of events here. Like I said, we've done a Hack to the Future. We did 4 of those. One of them, we had actually one of the, not interns, but fellows from Code for America. And we had people come from Dublin and Toronto to come and speak. Tonight we're doing a blockchain event because of the fact that a lot of these small cities have cheap electricity, and I think Hamilton is one of them that is really trying to use blockchain as an innovation kind of catalyst in their area. And then we run Canada Learning Code events, and I run summer tech camps for youth. So those are all the awesome things that are happening here. So I think that's my last slide. So thank you very much. And looking forward to hearing from the rest of everyone.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It's great to hear of all the cool stuff happening in Cornwall. Up next is Andre Cote. He's currently an independent consultant and was previously a senior policy advisor for the minister responsible for digital government at the Government of Ontario. Take it away, Andre. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Luke. So, like the other presenters, thrilled to be able to participate. I think this is, obviously a super exciting topic. The report I thought was great, and I'm a huge fan of both Evergreen and Code for Canada. So thrilled to be able to participate. So as you mentioned, I'm currently a bit of a sort of freelancer right now, but my sort of recent story was I recently left the Government of Ontario at the end of last year after three excellent years working as a senior advisor to Minister Deb Matthews, who was the president of the Treasury Board and then the Minister of Advanced Education and Skills, and also Ontario's first Minister for Digital Government. And so with her, I was advisor on enterprise technology for the Ontario government. I worked on open government, the open government strategy, and then I think sort of most interesting or germane for this, worked really closely with her and the team in government to build Ontario's digital services strategy, to launch the Ontario Digital Service as the organization inside government to really lead that. And then to recruit Ontario's first chief digital officer as well. And one other piece that we're really proud of was getting to work on, as sort of the partners inside government, on the establishment of Code for Canada, with Ontario as one of the seed funding partners, as well as committing to take on the first fellowship team with Code for Canada. So really pleased with their success, obviously. So what I will focus on mostly is some of the things that we learned in the Government of Ontario. But I think that, generally speaking, a lot of it is about how to make data digital and engagement stuff happen in government. It's sort of the, what are some of the elements of the secret sauce to make some of those things happen. The things I'll speak to, really all of the recommendations resonated with me, and the things I'll speak to touched on a whole number of them, from letting the community in to looking outside for solutions, thinking beyond governmental or city boundaries, and enabling and empowering public servants, which I think is really critical. So if we could just move to the first slide. So the first points on the left, these are really some of the lessons that we applied, or that were part of our game plan with the Ontario government. One thing was, pick 2 or 3 high impact projects that can really get people excited about what digital change, digital transformation can look like. But in doing so, make sure they fit the right criteria. And our criteria really, it was more art than science, I would say. And the foremost for me was really that it touched a lot of people, that it touched a lot of humans, a lot of citizens. It helps that, the priorities that are already something that is moving in governments, and that the leadership readiness is there as well. So the 3 we really worked intensely on over the last couple of years were the Ontario Student Aid Transformation, which I'll come back to, working with our health ministry in terms of making a lot of what they do easier for the public to access. And then the third that's not listed on the slide was with Service Ontario, which is really the front window of the Ontario government that does 50 million transactions a year. So when you're trying to figure out how to make life better for citizens, those are really the some great places to start. So in addition to the high impact projects, we also really focused on how to fix the basics. And so I have the blockchain or the artificial intelligence. Those are cool new technologies and opportunities that government should be looking at. But we had some much lower hanging fruit to focus on. So how do you make our websites as easy to use and mobile friendly? How do you introduce some very basic service finder tools for some of the key things that people are going to government websites to find? How do you pay basic attention to the user experience and those types of things? The third one then, the teach a civil servant to fish. You know, the idea there was we created the Ontario Digital Service, which is really the sort of center of expertise in the Ontario government in terms of focusing on new agile ways of working, in terms of introducing some new technologies, in terms of supporting other parts of government to deliver better digital services. But I think, you know, what became very clear to me very quickly was in large organizations like that, and I'm sure in all municipal governments as well, a small team of the center of government just can't do it all. And ultimately the end game has to be getting buy-in across the organization, and ultimately having the business owners in all the different sort of service and program areas across government really understand the benefits for them and for their clients in terms of getting it right, and so taking on the ownership there. And so a couple of examples, if we could just move to the next slide. So this first one was the OSAP Transformation, the Ontario Student Assistance Program. So this is a $1.5 billion program. It was a huge policy transformation that made it available or free now for more than 200,000 students per year, which is an amazing story. But the digital piece of it was critical in the rollout of all this. And it included a full rebuild, you'll see on the left, of the OSAP application, making sure it was mobile enabled. Again, a lot of this sort of getting the basics right. It also included introducing an OSAP aid calculator, kind of like a mortgage calculator that you might find with the bank in the top right. And this turned out to be just, you know, it was you know, a 3-click, as easy as possible tool, and it was phenomenally effective in terms of helping young people especially understand how they could benefit from this program. And as of today, we're into the probably the 5-6 million uses range, which is just phenomenal, and really not something that we expected when it was first rolled out. And then on the next slide, please. And then just this idea of the basics. So, you know, again, people do stuff on their smartphones. This isn't news to anyone, so they should expect government there as well. I talked about healthcare. We work closely with the health ministry to basically repackage a lot of their content in the most user-friendly ways online. And a lot of it was supported through using a lot of the web analytics we have, which again is not rocket science. We embedded Google Analytics behind our Ontario.ca websites. And what we learned was by far the number one thing people go to, you know, the health websites to do is to get or renew their OHIP card. So we'll start with that right at the top of the page and calibrate the content based on that. And then the third visual there is a Service Ontario service finder. And again, just a very simple tool so that for the people who don't want to do their transactions online, how can it be as easy as possible for them to find the Service Ontario in their local community? And a lot of these tools are then very easily replicated across other parts of government. So the Service Ontario tool, you know, can then be used for Employment Ontario centers, and I think this comes at one of the real opportunities for municipalities, where huge opportunity to replicate across government, but also with other cities. And then on the next slide, please. So new ways to work and models of tech. I mean, I think the key point here is change is always hard, and change can be particularly hard in governments with a lot of a lot of complexity and different actors involved. But there can be a very clear value proposition for civil servants in government, and in being offered new ways to work, and also, you know, new types of technology and new approaches to procurement. And I would just say the stuff that Guelph's been doing is amazing on that front. And on this, our motto was always show, don't tell. So as opposed to telling people what they should be doing, help them do it or show them what better looks like. And it's just a much more compelling sales approach, I think. This point that Julie made in the introduction about mid-sized municipalities as perfect test beds, I won't belabor that, but I think it is really a huge opportunity, a great sort of location to test stuff and to share it, but also to be the recipients of cool stuff that's happening elsewhere. And then the final point for me, one of the big learnings was, I know a lot of cities and the Ontario government as well, were really focused on open data and open government. And this is great. Making as much data available as possible is fantastic, both for civic innovators and also potentially for economic activity. The key gap to me was, while we were making all this supply available in terms of the data, what we really failed to do was focus on the demand side of the equation. So how to engage and equip a lot of the communities outside of government to actually use the data. And so, some of this, hackathons are huge opportunities, design challenges, which will be my last example. And I mean, I think just in closing, I think both for city governments and also for Code for Canada, as these civic tech communities are being established, I think just a more deliberate focus on how to use those civic tech communities as places where you can cultivate the users of the government data, which creates a nice sort of virtuous layer. And so just on the last example, on the last slide. So the Student Pathways Design Challenge, this was a design challenge that we launched late last year with the Ontario Ministry of Advanced Ed. The purpose was really how to engage the tech design, civic tech communities to build a tool that will make it as easy as possible for, say, 17-year-old students to figure out what university or college should I go to and what career path will that set me on. It sounds easy, but it's actually a really challenging decision. And so we put up a $50,000 cash prize and had an amazing array of entrants. So I think, empowering the outside world to help government find solutions was a valuable part of this. The thing that I thought was really valuable was it was extremely empowering for a lot of the Ministry of Advanced Ed data team to actually be able to curate and share all this data with a bunch of people who really desperately wanted to use it. So powerful example for me. I know I'm over time, so thank you very much. And again, I think this is terrific.
Great, thank you, Andre. So next up, we have Sean Galloway. He's currently with the City of North Vancouver, but he's the former manager of urban design and GIS at the City of London. And he's here to talk to us a little bit about what London has been doing in terms of its smart cities projects. So take it away, Sean.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me. It's still morning over here in the delightful West Coast. And we haven't had snow in, I don't know, maybe 4 weeks. And it's been a balmy 15. So anyways, that's not why you have me here. So next slide. So you can see what I was doing at the City of London, amongst a variety of things, was leading what is called the Future City project. And this was a project that was came out of our official plan review to lead smart cities. And I'll talk about why we didn't call smart cities. So if we go to the next slide. So really this came out of a background where we wrote a section. I think we were the first city in the country to do this. I could be wrong on that, but our research showed that we were the first city to put a smart city section in its official plan. Yes, there's a lot of smart city strategies out there, not arguing that. We're not early to the table on that. But the nuance is that we put it into an official plan. And this official plan component was born out of Rethink London, which was the largest public engagement in Canadian history for a city plan, where we had over 240,000 Londoners engaged in the process. So significant engagement in smart cities, as it was termed through that engagement, was featured prominently in that discussion. We weren't using, as you note, future cities as part of the strategy bit, or sorry, smart cities as part of the strategy bit, because smart cities, a lot like the word sustainability, it means absolutely everything and nothing at the same time. And because it's so significantly overused. And really what we wanted to talk about was our future of our city. And we wanted to be clear that this was not an IT project. I think that is the utmost. And when you read the London plan, which is the city's official plan, and you read the smart cities section, it's very quiet on technology and talking more about the larger scale city building objectives we wanted to achieve. And this is really a plan about city building, and technology is merely a tool in which we can use to implement great city building. So the next slide. The one bit, and I'm not a guy who likes to come to presentations and slap up legislation on the screen, because that's not cool for anybody. But I think what the important bit here is, and this is Ontario's law in the Planning Act, but it's also important to note that the Local Government Act in British Columbia has a similar clause, and it's fairly consistent clause across all of the provinces. But you can see that despite any other act or general piece of legislation, no public work and no bylaw shall be passed that does not conform to an official plan or official community plan, whatever part of the country you live in. And the nuance here is that councils at the city level only act by bylaw. Everything they do is by bylaw. So irrespective of the item, whether it's planning or otherwise, everything that a council does to enact something has to be done by bylaw. So this is very important. And so we took this approach in the London plan, and similarly took this approach in the future city study, that it was going to be planning led. And the piece here is that planning will coordinate all of the groups within the bureaucracy to move this forward, because we have the legislative tool to require the other groups to do these things. And so this was the main focus, rather than picking certain pieces of technology and rolling with it. So the next slide. Out of this, we had an engagement of the 4 pillars, which you see, and you can see it's not technologically oriented. It's around things that cities do, and the way that cities deliver services to its communities to improve the life and the quality of life of its residents. And so we focused on these 4 city building aspects, and we wanted to ensure that we created tools out of this strategy to improve our citizens' lives and what was ailing them. And a lot of the engagement that we did, because these 4 pillars was just the engagement component. This was to help break it down for the average John and Jane Doe, to let them understand what we were actually talking about. And from this engagement that we had, which was a significant engagement coupled with the official plan engagement, we built 5 key directions that came out of that. One was on improving mobility. One was on creating green buildings and green infrastructure. One was e-government and public engagement, how to use technology to better our face to the community. Fostering the knowledge economy. And this was an important one around the focus that the city isn't going to implement everything, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. We don't have the wherewithal to do that, and there's going to need to be a grassroots effort to implement a lot of these pieces. And so we needed to foster that knowledge-based economy to help deliver that. And then using data to make better decisions. I mean, everyone loves a government that makes quality decisions. So why not use good data to make good decisions? And so those are the 5 key directions now that the plan is focusing on. And the intent there is that we've built a plan around smart cities that can last 20, 30 years and can adapt to whatever technological changes may occur within the spectrum of the environment in which we work. And I think that's the important bit. It's a longer term strategy. Because the one issue we have over time is we do one project, we get the best technology at the time, we do one project, it's kind of like the one and done. Yeah, we got the project, council says, yeah, we've implemented smart cities, great, we can move on to the next shiny thing. And you don't have that longevity over time, because when you come back to ask for the second project, they're already saying, well, we gave you X millions of dollars to do this first project. Don't be coming back to my house asking for more money, 3-4 years later. And so, but when you create a strong strategy that can last time, you can use that to leverage the budget opportunities. So next slide. So the scope of work, I think, is the important bit that where we really broke down these pieces. One of the things municipalities face is that our IT departments are not well resourced to deliver a public interface. They are resourced to ensure that when I go to work and I hit the power button on my computer, it turns on, and when I load up my email, I get it. And outside of that, and protect the network at large and the data that's in the network. Outside of that, they're not well resourced to do these things in terms of interfacing with the public, exchanging data, ensuring that we provide these public engagement services that could tap a lot of network capacity and other IT infrastructure, public Wi-Fi and those types of things, or whatever public access to the internet that you may use depending on the technology you decide to use as a operation. They're not well resourced to do that, and so everything becomes insular in an IT department. So how do we do that? How do we change that? And one of the significant components of this strategy was really focused on the human capital needed to deliver a smart city. In a bureaucracy, you need a champion, irrespective of what the topic area is. You need somebody at the table always saying, well, you got this development now, why aren't we taking bonusing for IT infrastructure or fiber optic cabling or any of these things? What I've seen, even here at the City of North Vancouver in London, is that municipalities, because the projects are not being planning led, don't leverage the Planning Act, which has huge capabilities in terms of delivering development charges. So one of the things we were looking at the City of London was how do we build in development charges for public internet access? As part of any development, we would now take money to develop a network that would allow public internet access in our transit villages, in our downtown. As part of bonusing of a development application, why are we not requiring developers to lay fiber optic cabling or give a municipality the monies to deliver? So there is this huge body out there of planning resources that is largely seen as a land use exercise that has unbelievable capabilities to deliver infrastructure and needs to be used, because the legislation is clear. You got to do it. And if it's in your official plan, you got to get it into your city plan. And when it's in your city plan, then you can start coercing the other departments to move forward and deliver those key components. The other bit to the scope of work is around the human infrastructure of managing data. So if we want to exchange the data with the outside world that we collect as a municipality, there's freedom of information and all those things. And I'm not saying these are hurdles you can't get over, but these are hurdles that municipalities struggle to get over, and they need assistance. They need the human capital to ensure that there is a framework in place to make sure that nothing out of the ordinary happens. But there's also this growing issue of it's great to share the data, but as a municipal operator, the data gets out there and people can interpret it in any way, and that's fair. I'm not against open data, but what ends up happening in some respects is people take the data and use it in nefarious ways, and it actually maligns programs like bus rapid transit development or light rail transit development, or starts setting the municipality back in terms of its progress forward. So I'm not saying there aren't solutions for that, but these strategies really need to be cognizant of that. So the last slide is really what we tried to do. Is as part of the London plan, there was 10 kind of overarching principles that we developed. And these three obviously pertain to the future city context. But I think what's important is that we built the plan, the London plan, and ultimately the future city strategy, because it has to implement everything that it is identified in the smart city section of the London plan. It started with the city as a commodity. when we go out and sell the city, it's a commodity that we sell. We do all different things. And I highlight a story about the firefighting brochure at the City of London. And nowhere in the brochure does it talk about the great fire hydrants that you get to use as a firefighter, or how yellow they're going to be, and how they have a special snow arm that lets you know, the snowfall lets you know where the fire hydrant's going to be, or how great the trucks are. There were pictures of people on bicycles riding on the Thames Valley Parkway, or people drinking coffee on a cafe next to Victoria Park, and all of those quality of life city as a commodity element. And it's no different in the smart city sector. If we're going to build smart cities or future city plans, this is about building a high quality of life so that you can go out and sell your city as a commodity in an effort to attract people to move there. And that's particularly important for mid-sized cities because you're up against the big guys who have lots of money. But as noted previously, we can be more nimble than the big guys. And there is a certain element of a higher quality of life because you're living in a smaller scale of urban environment. And so there's a real opportunity here to dive in and take the horns and move them forward. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Sean. Our final speaker will be Titus Ferguson. He's the Executive Director of the Un-London Digital Media Association and the co-founder of Civic Tech London.
Thanks, Luke, and good afternoon, everyone. I've got the, I guess, benefit or the opportunity or the distinction of following up on some very wonderful panelists and feedback, and especially coming off of what we just heard from Sean. I'm going to give you a little bit of a similar perspective, the London context, but from the community side. So we work very closely as community members and as citizens of London with our official plan, especially as engaged Londoners in the community that I am a part of. So let me tell you a little bit about the context of both on London, but more broadly, Civic Tech London and the work that we've been doing. Formerly, we would have been known as Open Data London. And we are a community of Londoners who are interested in identifying but then implementing solutions to these civic challenges. Like Luke mentioned, our vision is how does technology, design, and social collaboration solve some of these civic challenges. What's unique about us in the context of civic tech and especially, I guess I'd say, the mid-sized city context, is that we believe that the best work happens at the intersection of disciplines. So where we bring communities together, the edges of ideas, where communities collide with each other. And the mid-sized city is excellent for that because of the scale, the size, the opportunity to, or almost the necessity of bringing a very diverse group of people together just for quantity. So we began as Civic Tech London back in 2008, but we would have been an open data advocacy group back then. So like Sean mentioned, being one of the first or the first community in Canada to enshrine a smart city strategy in our official plan, we were also one of the first communities in the country to really get on board with the open data movement. We would have been the first mid-sized city in Canada to develop an open data portal policy and strategy at the city level. But since then, in the last 10 years, we've been collaborating on a variety of civic innovation projects, hackathons, and events. And now we're at that stage 10 years in where we're starting to evolve into an even broader and deeper, more civic development platform or incubator as well. So looking at our next slide, I'm going to tell you a little bit of the story behind this, these three words. So gather, create, and improve. These have been the mission or vision statement for our community group ever since the beginning. It was actually developed through I call it the design charrette, or an open call for ideas and for feedback. And it was after about 6 hours of just brainstorming and planning and thinking and some pizza, where somebody walked up to a whiteboard and they wrote down these three words as really capturing what our community was looking to do with our civic tech, our open data group, our community platform, and support organization. And this actually, this picture is the words that were written down about 8 years ago. And it's aged very well. I think that it actually can be applied to a number of different contexts and very nicely to the smart city conversation. So using this framework, we really continue to gather community together, right, to discover, to learn. And we've used those opportunities to create, to develop new solutions, products, and impacts. But then also we're keeping in mind the iterative nature of this. We're remaining open to new ideas and to insights, knowing that there's always something to add and that there's an invitation to remix and to reimagine. And that's what a smart city is. It's what a smart city strategy is. It doesn't remain static. It doesn't get implemented once and just need to be applied. It has to be improved and gathered again and recreated continually. So look at the next slide. What I want to do is focus on one part of the smart cities definition that's found in the report, and that is the what does it mean to be collaboratively built? What is a collaboratively built smart city? Looking at it specifically from the context of grassroots and community-led. So I think it's first important to acknowledge that there's really no single way or no proper way to collaborate and build community. You know, there are unique needs and strategies that are going to work in one context and not another. But I believe that there are things that all thriving communities, specifically in the smart city context, will have in common, and that you know, working together, a willingness to invite new people to the table, to give those voices weight and provide them with opportunities is central to that. But I think that there are maybe 8, probably even more strategies that I'd say are present in successfully collaborative environments. So I've got them up on the next slide there. The first important thing is that we understand the roles that are well defined, the roles of city leaders, the responsibility that they have. What is ultimately their job that only they can do with either the legislative power that they have, the capacity, or the scale at which they work. And then where does that translate into the facilitation that they can provide, where the community and the public comes in? And then what are the things that only the public does? There are, you know, particular roles that really should fall only within the community's leadership or their responsibility. But then how are we facilitating two-way support between those? We need to have a system and a process in place where it goes both ways. Continuing to identify and to develop ongoing opportunities for varying impact and importance. So understanding that the small projects can be just as important and as empowering as, say, a big hackathon. That small project can be the entry point for somebody into the civic leadership or into a type of impact that might seem inconsequential, but is huge to them at where they're at in their career, their life, or their involvement. The big piece here that I do find common in every community-led project is this willingness to embrace failure and also unfinished projects. Oftentimes when we're looking at implementing smart city strategies, or cities are, they see the community as more of an agency model, somebody or group that you can hire to just deliver on a scope of work or to receive a product back from. I think it's important to understand that that's not the end goal. The end goal is empowering them to experiment and to potentially fail, to start something but not to finish it. That's the deliverable that the community provides back to communities. Key in any sort of community development is the need to constantly recruit new community members, to renew that core leadership and to bring in new active participants into the group. Playing on some of the recommendations from the report as well too, when we're doing community building, and especially in a smart city context, we need to be inspired by how other communities are structured. We need to import those ideas into your context, but then also find what works well for you and export that back out. So it's not just the strategies of a smart city that can be influenced from outside, but it's also the community development that can be as well too. Playing on as well the idea of two-way support and defining the roles, encouraging an upside-down mentorship program. And by that, I mean, how do senior leaders, how are they mentored and educated by young graduates, by students, by people new into their career, as opposed to looking at the traditional a wise sage who's been doing this for years, talking to a younger generation coming into it, flipping that on its head so that new ideas can be welcomed and encouraged into a conversation, maybe in a way that they wouldn't normally be in a mentorship context as well. And then the last thing that's really critically important when we do community building and look at a smart city, especially where we're at now historically, is documenting and sharing that. And this one's especially important to us here in London, because we've been in this sector and working in this space for so long, but haven't well documented some of the work and some of the successes we've had. We're having to sort of dig through archives and justify at sometimes the opportunities that we have as a community to be a part of this work. That's changed over the last few years, especially as Sean mentioned, the amount of community input that went into the London plan, into the future city strategy as well too. But I would say that that's really important as groups look to engage with their communities as they develop out their smart cities, to ask for and to encourage that documentation. So these 8 things, these strategies working together can build out a toolkit, and then the impact of them can be felt in 3 ways. I got on the next slide. So this idea that we're then stronger together or better together, that collaboration across sectors and influences will result in a deeper, more lasting impact. Then the idea that we are fully comprehensive, because this isn't just a grassroots or a bottom-up community development model, but it's across a chain of responsibility and of impact, that the ideas are more representative of the stakeholders and of the users, that diversity and inclusion is central into how your community comes to decisions and develops out recommendations and begins to implement them as well. And then the other result, and the final result, would be the scalability that comes along with this type of community building and strategy, that you're laying a foundation upon which we can start to layer bigger and more impactful projects, knowing that you have the community's sort of buy-in and cooperation, because you're incorporating that into the project model as well too. So I'm going to leave it with one last sort of slide here that talks about where we started to go. So we started with the idea of gather, create, improve as a sort of trifecta of community building and of documenting and reporting. But as we've emerged now more into civic innovation and the emerging civic tech and some of these conversations we're having in our mid-sized cities, we started to realize that the benefit of this is what I have up here. This idea of thriving cities comes out when we enable people. So helping people to create together, then we all come out stronger. We all come out benefiting. And when everyone benefits, it's sort of a tautology, it's redundant, but it's worth saying that our cities thrive as a result. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Titus. And thank you to all our speakers for sharing your insights and your experiences and your learnings with us for the report and with our audience today. So we know everyone's keen to get to Q&A, but just before we do that, we wanted to leave you with some suggestions for how Evergreen and Code for Canada can help you continue your smart cities journey. So there's lots of sort of options in programming that enables you to engage with our organizations, and hopefully we can, as Titus said, sort of work together to kind of co-create some solutions. So, you know, in the immediate future, Evergreen is hosting a researcher and practitioner roundtable on May 16th in London, Ontario. It's a place to meet other people like our speakers and like yourselves who are working to make your communities better places to live. If you're curious about how kind of the latest digital methods, new technologies, new processes, and new ways of working can help you drive innovation in the public sector, whether that's inside of government or outside, Code for Canada offers a course called Digital Government and Civic Tech. It's available online for the first time, so it's available to anyone across Canada, and the first online iteration of that course begins on May 28th. We'd also just like to encourage you to reach out and to connect with the people who you've heard speak on this call. And both Code for Canada and Evergreen are happy to facilitate any connections or relationships that you need to help advance your smart cities work. And also you can just give us a call, reach out, send us an email. We'll put contact information up on the screen momentarily to talk to Evergreen and Code for Canada about how our specific programming you know, can assist you in your smart cities endeavors and help you make your city a bit smarter. So we want to thank everyone for your time and your participation. It was really inspiring to hear about everyone's experiences and see the threads that connect everyone working in this field, whether they're in London or Guelph or Cornwall or the province and hopefully beyond. You know, I was personally really inspired, and I hope you were too. So we do want to move to questions. We've got about 15 minutes left, and here's the process. So you can go to this link and ask any questions you have on our shared digital whiteboard, and Julie and I will go back and forth and toss them to our panelists. So I'll start. Just want to thank Sean for asking a great question. Will this presentation be available for download at the end of the webinar? It most certainly will. A video of the webinar will be going up on Code for Canada's YouTube channel, and we'll be circulating links for everyone to the slide deck, to the video, etc. So if you've registered either on Eventbrite or through zoom.us, you'll be getting contacted and be given links to both the slide deck and the video itself. I'm going to throw it to Julie for our next question.
Sure. So we have one from Nabil, and maybe I'll throw this one to Stewart from Guelph first. Nabil's asking, what does accountability look like for these different initiatives? How can people who are not necessarily digital natives engage meaningfully in and hold the Guelph and Cornwall initiatives accountable? So Stewart, I'll throw that one to you first, and maybe Kelly can answer next for the Cornwall context.
Well, thank you. First of all, that's an excellent question, and accountability and measurement are at the heart of a lot of this work and our ability to stay relevant. So, and accountability happens on a number of different fronts, I would say. There's political accountability, there's accountability to our citizens, and first of all, it's setting targets. So what we're working on doing, and I shared just briefly, guelph.ca/thecount, was about creating a platform where we can start measuring our performance. The data that we've put up there is in some ways placeholder data to make sure that we could create a thing where we were starting to measure, openly show what we're working on. We're in the process right now of developing a community plan for Guelph, and through that work, we're going to create layered accountability and community reporting that's not just based on city targets and internal facing work. It's also going to be community targets, and what are we looking at? And so what we'll be measuring will become apparent through the course of developing this community plan, and that's where we're going to find true accountability. And what often happens, and I would say is a challenge that we're taking on, is that when we develop plans, whether it's an open government action plan or a master plan or a strategy, the challenges for those plans and strategies to live beyond just a paper document that sits on the shelf. So we're committing to an annual reporting to the community that checks in on the work that we've done through the community plan work and measuring the impact of innovation on an ongoing basis. So that's the writ large. It's a challenge to show and demonstrate accountability, but it's a fight for our resources and continued survival as innovation teams. So we have to take this work seriously, and it's also work that we're talking about at a federal level and provincially. How can we be doing a better job of measuring the impact of innovation so that cities, and mid-sized cities in particular, aren't all measuring and being accountable in very different ways? Can we start to find uniform ways to measure how we are developing that impact to our citizens and our businesses and our stakeholders? So I hope that was helpful, but it's a very good question and one that we continue to grapple with.
So I guess I'll go ahead. Kelly here from the city of Cornwall. I love data, and I love pairing data with marketing and outcomes. So one of the ways I measured impact with the grant we received from the Trillium Foundation was surveys, so pre and post surveys. Bringing that data together at the end of the program and using infographics to tell the story of impact. I use Canva to actually build out infographics, and people love to see that data designed and telling a story in a certain way. So I definitely know that anytime I make a decision, the first thing I do is I look at data, and that tells the story of what needs to be done or what doesn't need to be done. So yes, we are accountable, and hopefully we can use more data to impact the community.
Great. There's a question for Andre. So where do you think it's most important to build buy-in? Is it on the political side, which may imply greater focus on branding, or on the business owner, the public servant side, which may imply doing basic services better?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. It's something that I've certainly thought about a lot. You know, one of the things I found curious, and so in my role over the last couple of years, I was a political advisor, so advising a minister, but I've also spent a lot of time working in the civil service, both with Ontario, briefly at the municipal level. One of the things that I found really interesting and perplexing about the digital government piece in particular was that the value proposition wasn't more readily apparent on the political side, because research has demonstrated that some of the most impactful interactions that people will have with government won't necessarily be reading headlines in newspapers about this or that. It'll be their actual direct interactions on services. And so I think it just stands to reason that the better you can make those interactions, the more convenient you can make those interactions, the better those services are designed for people, the better their response to government will generally be. So, I think that value proposition was very clear to us. It was definitely very clear to my boss, the minister. We had more work to do than I expected to sort of get that across to some others on the political side. But I think, once, the show don't tell again, was really powerful. Once they started to see what their services look like, that they're accountable for, and that they're out talking to constituents about, that was powerful. And then on the civil service side, I think it's similar, but there are, of course, slightly different incentives in terms of what's going to drive people to embrace something like that. I think the size and scale thing was very challenging in the Ontario government, because it's just so bloody big, and there are so many things happening at any given time. We had to be very selective about picking the places that we would go, the groups who were most ready to be engaged. I think, there is a real opportunity to sort of sit, mid-sized city level where there just aren't all of the layers of bureaucracy is the wrong term, but just the layers of government that need to be engaged or involved in these types of things. And so while I think the most important thing that people will have to do is build buy-in and create relationships and partnerships and all that, and the actual technology parts sort of come after that. I think a lot of the mid-sized cities should be very well positioned to do a lot of that, because they hopefully won't have to do quite as much sort of bureaucracy battling as you might have to in a large government like Ontario or Canada, or even Toronto. I hope that sort of answers the question.
Thanks, Andre. I think you definitely did answer the question. I think we'll move on to one that I'm going to direct at Sean. This is a question from John. What are 3 municipal smart city strategies in Canada or the US you would suggest are good examples of best practice?
They're all out there and they're all quite similar. We used Vancouver, Montreal, and I think those were the 2 primary, and we did a little bit with Toronto. I don't think there's one out there, and particularly from the lens that we were coming at it, by enshrining it into the planning framework. And so we were kind of advancing new ground in that regard. So we were kind of learning as we're going. But on the basis of your digital or smart city strategy, I mean, they're all out there. They're all the 4 pillars that I showed you that we use for engagement. You'll find them in pretty much any smart city strategy. But yeah, Montreal, Vancouver were the big 2 that we used. There was also St. Albert's in Alberta, I think, was another one that our consultant also identified for us.
Great, thanks, Sean. We've got time for a few more questions. I want to highlight one that's geared towards Kelly. So we'll get Kelly to answer this one. How are school boards connecting to municipal planning processes to support education and career and life pathway planning?
Definitely good question, because when I actually moved back to Cornwall, there was a lot of talk about schools closing, especially in rural areas, and it's a very contentious issue around here. We just had Kathleen Wynne come visit last week, and that came up a lot. I was very lucky when I came back because I connected with one of the superintendents of the school board, and now I have the problem of getting so many requests that I don't have enough people to actually go out to the schools. So that being said, they are getting a lot of support because of organizations like Canada Learning Code getting financial support from the Government of Canada and from big tech companies. But there is no cohesive strategy with the city. There is in the rural areas more so that kind of support. And I think it's due to the fact that some of those schools were at risk of closing.
Thanks, Kelly. Okay, well, here's another one directed to Sean. How do you engage the anchor institutions, so school boards, hospitals, post-secondary institutions, located in municipalities, in pooling your resources to maximize existing resources?
So great question. I think it's twofold. First, I can speak because I was the project lead on the Rethink London and the London Plan. We went out to we went out to the school boards, we went out to the hospitals, we went out to the universities and the college, Western University, Fanshawe College in London, and we held sessions with them on the London Plan. So it was a little bit bigger than the smart cities. So we did that. Then when we did the future city or smart cities component, 2 pieces. One is we had a steering committee which had the the college, the university, and the hospitals on them. And we also did engagement with each of those groups as well. We went out and specifically had sessions earmarked with staff in those areas. But we also had there's a group in London called LargeNet, which basically is the internet provider for almost all of the public institutions. And so LargeNet was a funding partner to this strategy. So the planning department, the IT department, so the City of London from that perspective, but planning and IT, and then LargeNet and London Economic Development Corporation, we pooled our money together to undertake the study. So that all of those people had their hands in there.
Great, thank you, Sean. We've got time for one more question. It comes from Kijo. She wants to know how does sort of smart city strategies incorporate continuous public engagement and community knowledge intake? I'm going to actually start with Titus on this one, as someone who's been very involved in his community.
Sure. I think that you've got to, own it from the very beginning. So the fact that we've all talked about how it's an ongoing process, that you don't just dip into community engagement, you sort of live in it. It's not something you jump over to just to get approval for a decision that's already been made. So as smart cities are developed, as a strategy is implemented, it's inherent and it's critical to its success that it be driven by public engagement, by community input, by their knowledge of its application, and then using that back to changes and tweaks. That's when I think about what a smart city strategy is, that's ultimately at the end of the day. The things that tie together the various parts of it are the people who are living it. And so we can't forget about them, but have to make them front and center.
Great, thank you, Titus. So that brings us to a close. Thank you so much to everyone who participated, all our speakers, and for all our attendees. We want to thank you for your interest in Code for Canada and Evergreen Smart Cities research, and for your sincere desire to move the smart cities conversation in Canada forward. We really look forward to working with you, to borrow some words from Titus, to gather together, to create with you and hopefully improve life in Canadian cities, both small, mid-sized, and large. And we really are keen to connect with you if you're working on any projects at any level that are going to make your city smarter. So up on the screen right now is everyone's contact information who was involved in the webinar today. Apologies for some of the formatting glitches, but you should be able to discern everyone's email. And yeah, we'd really encourage you, no matter what you're working on, to reach out, to find ways to engage with Evergreen, to find ways to engage with Code for Canada, and engage with everyone who's on the call today and anyone else who's working to make Canadian cities smarter. So thank you for spending the afternoon with us, and we look forward to talking with you again.